Hey there, this is your host, Selena Robinson. You are listening to Journey to Gentle Podcast. I am a mama sharing my journey to be more compassionate, mindful, and supportive with myself, my kids, and others. Thank you for tuning in. On this journey, I have with me today my mom. In this episode, my mom will talk about my grandmother's experience coming to the U.S. from Panama in the late 60s. She also talks about being the oldest out of all of her siblings and what it was like being a military brat. Most of what she talks about, I've actually never heard before, so this is all new to me. I wish I could have got more of my reactions, but I stayed muted most of the time because my kids were around. And yes, you will hear both of them throughout the podcast. So, let's jump into it. Okay, so I am very interested in having this conversation with you around race. I'm not sure, other than around recent events and bouncing ideas off of you for the podcast, I don't think that we've had too much of a discussion, especially not starting from the beginning of our family with mama and daddy, and then your experiences, and then how that kind of shaped the way that you raised us. So yeah, I'm definitely very interested in your view of things, and then also the difference in having a mom from another country. And so before we get started, I call my grandparents, my mom's parents, mama and daddy. That's kind of how everyone refers to them. So, and I call my mom either mom or ma or madre. So hopefully this doesn't get too confusing.
I mean, yeah, I guess some people would get confused a little bit, but when I explain to people that, hey, for some reason, my mom, because of everyone hearing us call my mom, that's what they would call my mom. For my dad, they would either call him dad or pops, because that's what he was called at home. So that's what all the kids picked up. Yeah. So your question is how was it growing up with my parents?
Yeah. So I guess maybe we can kind of start off with daddy and his background, if that helps any, because they met once he was in the military, right?
Yes. So my dad was in the military. He got stationed down Panama at the base Panama Canal Zone, is where he met my mother while going to a softball game. My mother was a part of the Canal Zone softball team. From my understanding, my mother was into a lot of sports, and she was also on the city swim team. They got married in Panama. I know her first duty station with my dad was actually in Germany. Then they was in Germany. Then they went to Fort Riley, Kansas, where I had an older brother who passed away because he had a heart murmur. During that time, hospitals didn't have the capabilities of taking care of a child like they do now who has heart murmurs. And before my dad got orders to go to Vietnam, my mother found out she was pregnant with me. And a week before my dad had to fly, I was actually born 1 week prior to him going to Vietnam. So my mother had to go live with my father's family.
Okay, and so that's how you came to be in Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
Yep. So that's how I was born, in my father's hometown, which is Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
How much time did you spend in Alabama? When I asked my mom this question about how long she had been in Alabama, it was purely out of curiosity because she's an Alabama fan, Roll Tide, and so I kind of wanted to get an idea of how much time she spent there to cause her to be such a fan.
From what my mom tells me, is that We were there for a year and a half, and my dad came back. She said I had a hard time trying to figure out that he was my father, simply because my dad having so many brothers, that I assumed that they were a part of, well, they are a part of my life, but I assumed that they were my father, and my dad, I had nothing to do with him. But as time passed and me living with them, things got different. And then, of course, I was 2.5 years old when my sister was born, and she was actually born in Germany. Then I was 5, almost 6, when my second sister was born, and she was born in Tacoma, Washington, where my dad was stationed at Fort Lewis, before it became Joint Base Lewis McChord. And then we went to Germany. Then we came to Fort Leavenworth, where my brother was born. Then we went back to Germany, and I graduated high school in Germany. From graduating high school in Germany, that's where I had my first child, Selena and Elisha, which is Selena's older brother. They were born in Fayetteville, North Carolina, which Fort Bragg was my dad's last duty station, and that's where he retired, in Fayetteville, North Carolina.
And that's where you signed up?
Yes, I actually signed up for the military in Fayetteville, North Carolina. So most of my life was growing up military. It was difficult. It was it was like being in your own little bubble. When we used to visit my cousins in Alabama, you could tell the difference in how they did things and how we did things. And they used to always call us the city people, because we didn't talk like them, we didn't act like them, which was kind of hard trying to blend in with my cousins and, you know, be a part of their life.
So, I definitely had similar situations to my mom not fitting in with her cousins because of the way that we talked and the things that I liked and the way that I dressed. I sometimes felt like I didn't fit in with other black kids. And so for me, the fact that she had the same experience but within her family was definitely significant.
So we pretty much was more very family oriented and very close with one another in my family.
With it, like your siblings?
Yes, with my siblings. And I say we were close, because when you saw us, we were very tight knit. But inside the home, of course, like any other home, there was jealousy. Um, being the oldest, I had my own room. I had a lot of my own stuff. But not only that, I was responsible for everything that my siblings did. If they did something wrong, I was responsible for it because I was the oldest. And I was the first one to get uh, punished for it. I don't have any other words to say.
In this part, I wanted to add a trigger warning. My mom talks about the punishments that she received, specifically having food withheld. If you would like to skip this part, please skip ahead about 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
Pretty much the punishments that I did get were very conventional. Um, yeah, we've all heard the stories of getting hit with the slipper, getting hit with the wooden spoon, but some of my stories are a lot worse than that. Um, I've had times where I didn't eat because of something that my brothers and sisters didn't do or didn't complete, and it was my fault. So I didn't get the dinner. Um, or if I didn't fix their lunches, it was my fault. Um, there were times where if I didn't clean my room a certain way, or if I didn't get work done, household chores a certain way, The, as we called them, butt whoopings that we got were, either with a belt, an extension cord, a slipper.
That is very different from like the way we had it whenever we lived there. Because I remember getting a paddle. They had that special like wooden, looked like a cutting board to me. It was very thick, but it was specifically for whoopings. But I don't think they didn't do all that other stuff to us.
So, being that I was the oldest, I got totally different discipline than everyone else did. My sisters after me, their disciplines were way different. They would get the paddle and they would get sent to their room because they were younger. I was the oldest and I was supposed to set the example for them. So because I failed, this is my discipline. Whereas when my sisters and my brothers would do something, their discipline was able to be talked to, and then they were disciplined. My younger brother barely got any discipline because he was the boy in the house, the only boy in the house. So he was expected to do things that the girls weren't expected to do.
Sounds like really rough for you being the oldest and having all of that responsibility put on you.
It was. But one of the things I had always told myself was that when I had kids, my children will have a voice. We would talk about things that how they should have done something better instead of what they were doing and they thought was right. I looked at everything that my parents did to me, and it was mostly my mother that did most of the disciplining, because my father was gone. In the military, we go to on different missions. And back then, a lot of the missions will last 2 to 3 months, not the week-long missions that we have now. These aren't called, they weren't deployments. These were just things that they would go and practice on their particular job as a group.
Do you think many of the unconventional tactics come from the fact that Mama was from Panama? This question about the unconventional parenting tactics coming from Panama potentially comes from the idea behind the chancla. I hear many Latinx people talk about their mothers using chanclas. So I was curious to if many of these may have been that for my grandmother. So maybe they didn't come from her culture, but maybe it was something that happened within her family. But then again, there could have been many different reasons why my grandmother picked this up.
I think so, but I'm not too sure because we did not meet any of my mother's family members, which was very weird. She did have a lot. She has 6 sisters and 4 brothers. At the time that I can remember, she only had one sister that still lived in Panama. All her other siblings had moved to the United States. We never met them. We know about them, but as far as meeting them, we never met them. No, I take that back. We did meet one sister, and that was because we were going to Germany and we stayed with them in Far Rockaway, New York, because we were flying out of JFK airport to go to Germany. But it was like maybe an overnight. So I really can't give you too much details about my mom's family. I do know when she passed that her sister said that my mom did have a what do you call it? She didn't have a very forgiving mindset. So if somebody done something wrong to her, she pretty much cut you off. And her thing was that even though she had older brothers and sisters, she would always tell me she was the oldest at home and she was responsible for everything. And To me, that sounded like the treatment that I may have gotten because I'm the oldest. This is what's supposed to happen. But listening to her sisters and them now, it wasn't like that in their house. Now, as far as my dad, he grew up in a semi single family home. He has six brothers and three sisters. His dad was around, but his dad didn't live with them. From my understanding, he also had another wife who had six boys and, yes, another sister. But he lived more with that wife than he did with my grandmother. So whenever we, so
I'm
whenever
saying
we,
bye bye to Xander.
oh, okay. So whenever,
Bye bye.
he's too cute. But so whenever we visit my grandmother, we would only visit my grandmother. We barely visit my grandfather. Mind you, they were in the same town. When we did in school ask about, family, the little bit that I know from my mom is she was born in Panama Canal Zone. She did a lot of different sports. Her goal before she married my father was to become back then it was called a candy cane nurse. I think that's equivalent to a LPN, but having us and being a housewife is what my mother did.
You said she wanted to be a candy cane nurse?
Yeah, so it's like being a volunteer nurse that you go and you literally wear this outfit that looked like it was striped, like a candy cane. And that's what she would always call it. And I was like, oh, okay. So, we always assumed that once all the kids were in school, that my mother would pursue her career. She didn't. She just stayed as a housewife.
Do you happen to know like why she might have chosen not to go and pursue?
No. When I would talk to her about it, we would get into arguments about what she chose in life.
So then was she like very closed off?
Yes, very closed off. When it came to personal stuff, it was hard for her to really explain it. Most of it was I chose my life because I had kids.
Right. And then it wasn't
Yeah, and that was
not
it.
much more than that. It's just
And as many times as I've tried to encourage her to go get a job, I think the fact that because she felt that she was from another country, that she couldn't do it.
And can we talk about that for a bit in terms of like how it was for her, like from what you know, coming here to the US, being Afro Latina?
Yeah. So from what the little bit that we did talk about, when I used to try to encourage her to get a, go out there, get a job, get your citizenship, her her things was no, I'm not going to do it because of her
Quick
accent.
question.
Huh?
She wasn't a citizen?
No, she is a citizen, but she wasn't at the time when I used to try and encourage her to get her citizenship. It wasn't until I was 16, 17 years old when she got her citizenship. And that was during the time she explained to me why she didn't go through it, because when she had me and she lived with my dad's family, they pretty much were very prejudiced to her. She wouldn't tell me what they called her. All I know is that she felt very out of place. When she had to go somewhere, she had to learn how to do it on her own. She didn't know the simple fact and didn't understand why Black people sat in the back of the bus. She didn't understand the hatred of why she couldn't go to certain areas in
Do you
Alabama.
know about when it was that she came to the US? Because you were born in 1969.
It was in the late 60s.
The late 60s that she came to the US?
Yeah, that she came to
Right.
the U.S. And then, down in Alabama, from what I understand, where they lived at in Tuscaloosa wasn't like what I see it now, because I don't know. But this is the things my mother told me. It was, they would always throw, my dad should have married this other lady that they knew because they were high school sweethearts. They didn't understand how can she be black and not speak English. Yeah, it wasn't it was like they didn't know that there are black people who don't speak English.
Right. And so this is coming from other black people.
Yes.
They kind of had their own idea of like who or what a black person was, and she
Yeah.
didn't fit that.
Yeah.
I always thought that that would be something coming from white people, but this was something coming from other
Yeah.
black people. So her coming to the States was all of this, like being made fun of or not, or being treated like an outsider. That is coming from other black people, and then she's also not understanding all of the segregation.
Yeah. So a lot of people, don't realize there was still a lot of segregational stuff that was still going on in the late 60s. And
Yeah, I
the,
think Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968, a year
so,
before you were born.
I can't don't give me the lie. I can't remember. But I think you're pretty close.
Popping in here to confirm, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated on April 4th, 1968, and my mother was born January 1969.
So, and I think that's why we pretty much, my mom tried to keep us as close to her as possible because of the small hatred with her being black and having a different language. She didn't teach us Spanish. She would play a lot of Hispanic music in the house. She did teach us how to salsa a little bit, but not too much.
I mean, like, in many ways, you could tell she was proud, but at the same time, she hid it.
Yes.
And then that's from the experiences that she had in Alabama. And I think that kind of makes sense as to why she wouldn't want citizenship in this country, you
Yeah.
know.
When she did talk about Panama, she would always mention the festival. I think, from what I understand, she was a dancer in the festival.
Is this similar to like what they have in like Brazil?
Yeah, the carnival. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and so she called it the festival.
Well, she called
Or
it something else.
maybe
I can't remember what the name of it was, but
true, and then she was a fairly new English speaker, so she described it the best as what she could.
yeah.
But it's hard to picture Mama.
it a lot of times when I think about it, I was like, man, when she did tell us, I'm like, wow, she did all these things. How come we don't see that? How come we don't feel that? But then again, I go back and I remember, her stories that she said about how my father's family treated her. She didn't want us to have that same treatment, so she didn't teach us a lot of the teachings. And not only that, even cooking a lot of the different Hispanic foods. There's a lot of different Hispanic foods that she didn't teach us. She had her way of twisting Southern food and Spanish food that she knew how to cook together. So when I cook, I kind of cook like that the same way. But
But
yeah,
you spent a lot of time in the kitchen with Mama, didn't you?
yes, yes, I did. One of the things that I used to love doing was baking. Now, if there's anything my mother baked, everything was from scratch. There was never any box cakes in the house. That's how I learned how to bake everything from scratch. I mean, so when I go to baking things, I always try to bake it from scratch if I have the time.
Okay, sorry. Yummy, yummy, yummy. Okay, I think this is kind of like a good segue maybe into more racial things. Thank you all so much for listening to part one of me and my mom's conversation. Part two will be coming soon, but because of how much extra labor I have to put into editing an interview, next podcast we will be switching gears a bit, and I will share with you some of my fears and thoughts around raising two black boys in America. Thank you so much for tuning in. Follow me on social media at Journey to Gentle. Visit my blog at journeytogentle.com.